People were losing their confidence. And, you know, the battle continued, and then the night came down. When the night came down, things were settling down. And he says, it's the middle of the night. I'm sitting in my tank. I'm totally shocked. 3 of my soldiers are dead, right? And suddenly he says, I noticed something very weird. He looks at his crew members, the soldiers in his tank, and they're doing something very weird. They're all brushing their boots, polishing their boots, and shaving. Now, right, what the hell are you guys doing? We're in the middle of a tank in the middle of the night in Lebanon. But very soon he understood something. The soldiers lost their confidence. Everything they knew is gone, right? They lost their confidence. The world is very chaotic for them right now. There's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of a lack of clarity. And they were looking for something to hold on to. And what do you do in the army every single day? How do you start every day in the army? You start with brushing your boots no matter what. First thing you do, you brush your boot, you polish your boots, even if it's a rainy day, you're going out to the mud in a minute to work, you're gonna polish your boots. And the soldiers were looking for something certain, for something that is something they're used to from their routine, and they wanted to hold on to that, and that's what helped them gain confidence. And I'm starting with this because we're not at war right now, but we're in a very chaotic time, which none of us has ever experienced. Our leaders, the older guys, have never experienced this either. There's a lot of chaos out there, a lot of unclarity, uncertainty, I guess you can say. And I think the easiest thing for us, you know, being in lockdown, etc., is to just lose ourselves. You can very easily lose yourself, you know, drop, slack. And I can't, you know, none of us has ever experienced such a thing, but if there's one tip, one thing I can give, one thing I can say is really to share this story, because this is the story I shared to my soldiers when I tried explaining to them and preparing them for the fog of war. And this is for me also what I'm trying to do today. You know, it's a mess. We all, you know, everyone's out of business. Nothing's going on. There's no school. I'm at home all day with my 2 little daughters. And what I realized is after the first day was I was very depressed. I realized that I got to hold on to stuff from my routine. So each one of you can find whatever it is. If it's praying 3 times a day, if it's your daily workout, daily yoga, doing your hairdo just like you do every day. And I can tell you, I spend 15 minutes on this beauty every day, and I still do it even though I have no talks, no presentations, because it gives me sort of feeling of routine, gets me vital, makes me more productive. And the moment you have something to hold on to, even though there's chaos out there, you can be positive and be productive. On that note, I hope I wasn't talking too fast. So I'll introduce myself very briefly. I'm not going to go through the whole bio. I'll just say, my name is Yaakov. I'm 32 years old. I'm married. I have 2 little daughters. The third's on the way, B'ezrat Hashem, in the upcoming month. So there is some positive things happening after all. I drafted to the IDF exactly 13 years and a week ago. And I'm not a former captain. I'm actually still a captain. Actually, in a month or 2, I'm supposed to become a major. I've been serving for 13 years now in the armed corps in a tank unit called the 188. And this unit is located here in the Golan Heights. I'm not going to talk about the unit too much now. I'll just say I drafted as a tank driver, became a commander, became an officer, eventually a captain commanding 11 tanks. And I left the Army 3.5 years ago. And today I'm a captain in reserves. I hold 2 jobs in reserves. Last week, I was not the only, but my team of soldiers was the only reserve duty soldiers who were called into the IDF, aside from the Home Front Command. We were practicing for war. I'm still part of the 188 as the unit's combat operations officer. Some of the things I'm going to share with you today come from that perspective of an active combat operations officer, sort of a COO of the unit, coordinating the different things happening in the field, from the ground forces, operating, if it's tanks, if it's infantry, combat engineering, through intelligence, cyber, radio, logistics. The IDF has a very nice package to offer the soldiers, and I'm part of a team that's supposed to help the soldier in the front line get that. So that's one thing I do in reserve duty. The second thing I do in reserve duty is something I was supposed to do tonight. Instead of speaking with you, if not for Corona, I was supposed to be near Binyamina today, near Haifa, speaking to 20 outstanding officers, giving them a motivational talk. The Army wants them to stay, so I was supposed to come and talk to them about signing in for more. I'm also an IDF motivational speaker. I get called into units and into Israeli high schools on regular days when they actually work. And my job is to give the soldiers motivational talks. Now, why do you need motivational talks? Because today we're facing in the IDF a very big, I can call it a crisis. Yes, I can call it a crisis. Less and less people want to join the IDF since it is so successful. We'll talk about it maybe when we're going to go region by region today. When I reach Gaza, you'll see it. We have three options today for an Israeli teenager. Option number one, he says, the IDF is doing such a great job. He's not saying it, but since the IDF is doing such a great job, the borders are very safe. There's no threat to the existence of the state of Israel. The army doesn't need me, right? Why should I spend 3 years in the mud in the Syrian border if I can just be what we call a jobnik, right? I can just go be a cook, go home every day, or just not go into the army at all. It's not something that's, it used to be something like, that's not really common, that you just drop out of the army. Today, it's very, very common, unfortunately. You wouldn't be able to get a job 10, 20 years ago if you didn't serve in the army. Today you can. So that's one option, the slack. Your second option would be to draft into the IDF, do something very, very important for the state of Israel, which again, we'll also discuss in a few minutes. But while you're doing that important thing for the state of Israel, you're also fulfilling every Jewish mother's dream. Now, feel free to unmute yourself and answer. Can anyone tell me what is the Jewish mother's dream? Someone's gonna have to answer. I can't see all your faces. Someone's trying to talk, I can't hear it. Ellie, do you hear them? I can't hear you guys for some reason. So I'll tell you what the answers I usually get is, since I can't hear you guys. I'm gonna have to figure that one out in a sec. 1 second. Ellie, talk for a second.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. Okay, Ellie, what's the Jewish mother's dream? Do you know?
So someone wrote in the chat for to get married.
To get married. Okay, you guys are college students. That's what you're thinking about? Okay, usually the answers I get are doctor or lawyer, right? So that used to be the Jewish mother's dream. In 2020, the Jewish mother has a new dream, which is high-tech.
Startup.
There you go, startup nation, okay? Startup nation, right? You go into these very classy or classified intelligence and cyber units, 8200, 8200, right? The day after you're out of the army, you're making 10, 20 grand in dollars a month, right? The startup sector, the high-tech sector is just waiting for you. So you go in, you do something very Zionist, right? You're doing something for your country, and then, right, you make a good living and you fulfill the Jewish mother's dream. You sell your startup after a few years, you make millions of dollars from Google or Intel or whoever it is. Who's stuck in between? Option number three. What's option number three? The guys here. The guys in the tanks, the guys in the paratroopers, the motivation for Israeli paratroopers this year is the lowest since I was born, that's for sure. In the tanks, it's a known thing. We have there's low motivation to go into tanks. So we do different things such as offering people to draft with their friends to get the same tank crew. The paratroopers are now copying it from us because they realized it works and they're in trouble. That's just about myself. I'm just going to say, I'm not going to start giving you my whole professional background. I just want to emphasize one thing, which I pointed here. Our discussion in the next 45 minutes or so deals with two things. One, we're going to talk a little bit geopolitics, strategic issues, but really the insight I want to give you in this program is the field commander perspective, meaning I'm going to try going with you step by step through the borders of Israel. But I want us not just to understand what is the security minister, the minister of security, and what is the prime minister dealing with. I want you to maybe understand also what is the 19-year-old in the border dealing with. So So as I said, we're going to move it in two parallel paths. One is what we call the strategic path, geopolitics. The second is military challenges. With that said, I'll start with saying now that the IDF is one of very few, or maybe even I'll be more precise and I'll say is the only army in the whole world that on daily basis deals with a very, very wide or broad spectrum of threats. On one hand, every day, the IDF is dealing with what we call lone wolf terrorists. A 16-year-old Palestinian is affected by the incitement on Palestinian media and on the Palestinian TV, educational system, etc. Takes a knife, runs out, looks for the first Jew, if it's a soldier or if it's a civilian, and he tries stabbing him. This is something we don't hear about a lot in the news unless they're successful, but hundreds of them happen every year. And this requires, first of all, intelligence that the IDF has never needed before. We're talking about developing algorithms that can go through social media in a very short time and predict who's the next lone wolf terrorist. And on the other hand, one second, my daughter here is challenging me. Nune. And on the other hand, we're talking about preparing our soldiers who are out there in the field. They need to be alert at all times from this lone wolf terrorist coming at them. That requires a lot of shooting training, and Krav Maga actually is something that we always think every Israeli soldier goes through it. Until a few years ago, was mainly special forces. So that's on one end of the spectrum. Okay, we're here. On the same exact army, every day deals also with counter-ballistic defense. So just look at the differences between these two different challenges. And then in between, what about cyber, right? We need to operate an air force that can operate as Israel's long arm, hundreds of miles away from Israel. If it's in, by foreign reports, we've been recently visiting in Iran, Iraq, other countries in Africa. So that's something, again, that's happening every day. And in between, let's make it even more fun. We're talking about conventional warfare. We're talking about unconventional warfare. We're talking about guerrilla and terror organizations, which we'll talk about in a second. And just look at the variety of scenarios we have to train our soldiers for. We have a forested terrain in Lebanon, very rocky mountains with trees, etc. We have the desert, right? Gaza and the Negev. And then we have urban warfare, which we'll talk about also a lot in the next few minutes in all of the regions. Now, I'll just add one more nice thing for this week. Our home front command, before Corona, was running operations on a monthly basis with schools, with regional councils, preparing them for crisis. Now, usually they focus on crises such as missiles, but they're also responsible for dealing with earthquakes and different disasters or diseases. And the picture I put here is of, my friend gave it to me. This is the headquarters of the IDF Home Front Command. They opened for the first time in Israel's history. This is what's operating as we speak. The IDF is running an operation facing Corona. And this is the war room, the control room. For the first time, they managed to put all the government offices representatives in the same room with the IDF and with all the NGOs in Israel that are relevant for this matter. Sometimes when it comes to war, you can't because some NGOs don't want to get involved. They don't want to be associated with war, etc. Now everyone is in. So again, some positive things are happening, but look what the IDF, as we speak now, this is what the IDF is dealing with, and it's going to deal with it tomorrow and every day. So that's just in general. Now, what I want to talk about here is, again, this is my perspective. I'm of course putting in my professional background, but also my field experience. And I want to say a few words. I'm going to talk about the 21st century battlefield, which is relevant for every region we face. You'll take what I'm showing you now, you'll do copy paste, and you'll see the same thing happening in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria, all of the, even in the West Bank. It's all happening in all of the regions. And after this, of course, if you have questions, I'll answer, and we'll go step by step, region by region. We see how this is implied. We'll go through Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Judea and Samaria, etc. So what has changed in the battlefield? You see here, those of you, I see a few familiar faces. So those of you who have been with me to the Golan Heights, this is the south of the Golan Heights. This is the 1973 war. This is a watershed line in Israel's security challenges. Up to this war, the Yom Kippur War in 1973, this is what war looks like. To make it more fun, instead of looking at a map with soldiers, I always love comparing warfare, the previous warfare, conventional warfare, to this. Okay, enjoy Tom Brady wearing the Patriots uniform, not going to happen anymore. Okay, what did we see here? Aside from Tom Brady right here, again, if no one heard my comments, so enjoy him here. I was going to put the last Super Bowl, but it was so boring and there's no Tom Brady. So what do you see here now? You see here two teams. They're dressed up in uniforms, okay? There's a set of rules to this game. They meet here at the scrimmage line and they're trying to push each other forward, right? So if Tom Brady will get the football through now, and right there, the cornerback, whoever it is going to be running through, the border is going to move. The border is going to be set here, right? First and down, second and third, whatever it is. And the same exact thing you just saw right now is happening also here. This wars used to look like till a few years ago, or not this one exactly, but in general, again, you have your two armies meeting at the set border, at the front line, right? There's rules. The strongest one, if he's using arrows or tanks, is going to push the weaker one back and is going to conquer its land. This is what wars used to look like. And a few years ago in the IDF, I was part of a thinking tank, which we realized it's changed. Now, we can spend hours talking about this. I'll try making it as short as possible. So if this is what the battlefield used to look like, now, today, it looks, if I take it to three main points of what has changed, then it's right in front of you. There are no defined borders today, okay? Unlike what we saw in the video, right? This is the border between Israel and Syria, the border between the Patriots and the Rams, right? There's a set border. There's no more borders. The actors are hybrid. It used to be two states, right? Israel versus Syria, Israel versus Egypt, or Patriots versus Rams in the football case. Today, the actors are hybrid, and we'll see that in a second. And the third thing, which is the most relevant thing for me as a field commander, is an era of what we call the disappearing enemy. It's not only the enemy is hybrid and there's no borders, we also don't see it anymore. And if I take three main fields which we're facing, three main challenges we're facing today, then you'll see it applies to all three. One, cyber warfare. Can anyone watching this talk tell me where is the border in cyber warfare? There is none. Who are the actors? Okay, I have states, China, Israel, US, whoever it is, Russia. I also have terrorists. I have companies, financial companies. I have single hackers, right? It's different actors. It's not just states. And of course, I have no idea where the heck the enemy is. Second big challenge, multi-range missiles. We'll see soon when we talk about Lebanon and Gaza. We're talking about an era of missile warfare where our enemies are investing basically all of their R&D into developing long-range missiles. And these missiles basically erase the borders. When I was in my tank in Gaza in the war in 2014, my parents in Jerusalem were being shot at more than I was being shot at. So can anyone tell, where's the front line here, right? There is no front line. It's all mixed. The actors in this case, again, are hybrid because you have terrorist organizations and you have countries. And again, I don't see the enemy. I have a missile flying at me. I don't really see the enemy. Of course, there's exceptions. We'll talk about that soon. And the last thing is, and don't be afraid from what it says here, multi-dimensional battlegrounds. What is a multi-dimensional battleground? That's to zoom in and give you my personal perspective. This is what, first of all, the actual battleground, talking about boots on ground. This is an illustration of my unit going into the next war. Okay, God forbid. I mean, I hope we don't have it, but we need to be realistic. Okay, what do we have here? If the battlefield used to be very simple, there's a front line, two teams meet. Now we have a few changes. First of all, look how many dimensions I'm facing right now. Let's start with the ground dimension. The ground dimension main change is that instead of meeting in the open field like we saw in the videos, right? Where the two armies clash and battle, right? Fight each other. And that's where, for example, for myself as a tankist, I'm the king, right? I'm the king of the maneuvering. Instead of that, today, the ground dimension is happening in the cities, meaning any border you'll take of Israel, you'll find, and again, we're going to go soon border by border, you'll see that the battle is going to happen in the cities, in the villages, in the neighborhoods. They're drawing us into those places. And very soon we'll see why. So first of all, I have the ground dimension, which again is much harder than before. Urban warfare is much harder than open field warfare. Second dimension I have is the underground dimension. In the cities, we have tunnel networks. Some of them lead into Israel. Some of them connect there and are used for defense purposes or to confuse us. Then I have the low aerial dimension. By the way, notice I'm talking here about ground warfare. I'm not talking about air, space, water, sea, etc. I'm focusing, again, this is all just boots on ground. Low aerial dimension. We're talking about drones, which are more dominant in the battlefield more than ever. Both sides, by the way. Our enemies are also starting to use drones massively. Then we have the cyber dimension. Now you'll say, 1 second, isn't cyber strategic issues? You're right. But today, I'll be careful with what I'm saying. We have some sort of cyber elements, even in the field units, which allow us to damage the enemy's ability to operate within this playground. I'll put it that way. And then the last dimension, which you guys are actually very dominant on, is, in my eyes, the most important one in the 21st century, and that's the perception dimension. The whole purpose here, the whole goal is to affect people's perception, not from our side, from our enemy's side. Two things the enemy can gain here. One, I see here, 1 second, I want to show you one little thing. So, one thing the enemy can gain here. You guys see me? 1 second, let me share the screen again for a second. Okay, so first thing is, the enemy is not seeking ground anymore, land, right? You see here the map from 1973, the Syrians are attacking the Golan Heights where I live, and they're trying to conquer the land. If I compare it, for example, to the 2006 war in Lebanon, which I told you a story from before, when our troops were crossing the border into southern Lebanon, the enemy wasn't there to protect the land. The enemy allowed us just to go inside. And when the enemy wanted, what they did is attacked us from different directions, because their goal was this video you're seeing in front of you. Think about the effect of this video, and I'll put it on again. A Merkava tank, supposedly the best tank in the whole world, is blowing up live all over international media, and there was no social media then, but again, today you can understand it's going to be all over social media. How does this affect IDF soldiers who are supposed to go into battle? How does it affect Israelis who are sitting at home saying, okay, we'll be in the bomb shelter because we have the best army in the world and we trust the IDF? In your face. Think about how this affects people's perception. How does it affect people psychologically? So that's one aspect, okay? And of course, think about how does the Muslim Arab world see this, right? Right? HEZBOLLAH managed to knock down an Israeli Merkava. These guys are amazing. They're winners. Then there's another one. What you see in front of you now is a map of a neighborhood in Gaza, talking about roughly 2 to 3 square miles. Every colorful dot you see here is military facilities. Okay, this is nothing confidential. I brought it from Google. This is after the war, the 2014 war. You can see that when we have to go into this, we have a ground operation. We have to go inside it with boots and ground to destroy the tunnels, to stop the rockets being launched at Israel. And again, cyber and Air Force is not enough here. We go inside and we face a very tough situation. We're in a neighborhood that people live in. When you see here a tunnel, you see this is a tunnel, it's probably in a mosque or a UN school or a UN medical center. And then you find yourself, and people live there, and then you find yourself in this crazy scenario where you're facing, just for example, a group of civilians. Okay, let's say there's 20 people in front of you. Now, the enemy is not an army. It's not wearing uniforms. It's dressed up like you guys, right? Like we are dressed up now. And I have 20 guys in front of me, and the IDF intelligence through cyber and different elements we have is telling me there are 3 terrorists in this group. You guys can, I'll need people to step in, okay? So you can unmute yourself, and you need to make a call now under the pressure. You're a tank commander in Gaza now. Are you shooting towards the group of 20 people to kill these 3 terrorists or not? If anyone thinks you should shoot, just say your name, hop in. Come on, guys. It's tough enough to talk to the screen. You got to be...
Shoot.
Shoot, Harrison. Again, it's your second time. Anyone else? What about Dylan?
Not shoot.
Not shoot. One second. Trevor, you say not shoot. Okay, well, let's go with Harrison first, okay? Harrison, we shoot? Okay, boom.
Yaakov, we can't hear the video.
You can't hear the video?
No.
No?
No.
No, you didn't hear
I think
it?
you have to unplug your earphones.
I can play it again. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Breaking tonight on the battle between Israel and Hamas, the White House has
Yeah,
now
there you go.
joined the United Nations and countries around the world condemning a rocket attack that hit a UN-run school in Gaza earlier today. At least 16 people were killed, including innocent children. A White House spokesperson today saying, quote, Israel needs to do more to live up to its own standard to limit civilian casualties.
Okay, Harrison, you screwed up big time. More than that, so you're laughing at it, but I really think you're an, I don't know, immoral person. Unmoral, however you pronounce it in English. I mean, we both live in Western democracies, right? And you just killed innocent people. Trevor, you said not to shoot, right? Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I feel like this is also a trick question.
Okay. No, it's okay. You didn't shoot. It's all good. The 3 terrorists got away. 5 minutes later, shot a rocket.
Sunday in southern Israel, hundreds of broken hearts came to grieve little Daniel Tragerman. His parents weeping, overcome with pain, many hugging the 4-year-old casket as if not to let him go. And saying their goodbyes to an innocent child taken so cruelly from this world, another victim of the Gaza conflict. His mother also talking one last time to the boy she called every mother's dream.
Because also Trevor, if I'm not mistaken, can you hear me now, Ellie? Yeah? Can you still hear me? Okay. Trevor, you were part of the IDF, which stands for Israeli Defense Forces. You failed defending that 4-year-old whose parents and himself were counting on you. You're both not moral people, but you both made a decision. And it comes down to this. This is not a military question. It's not a strategic question. It's a moral question. But basically what it does, it puts a mirror in front of us, because we're talking, it's not just a war over land, it's a war over ideas. And what they're saying to us is, you believe in his amazing Western values, democracy, freedom of life, security, it's all blah, blah, blah. Great. That's what you call values. What's a value? A value is something I'm willing to pay for. If I really love, I don't know, your iPad, right? It's very valuable for me. I'm willing to pay the price of $200 to get that iPad from you, right? That's a value, something I'm willing to pay a price for. And what they're doing is, in this equation, they're putting a mirror in front of us and they're saying, these are your values. What's the price you're willing to pay? You're going to pay a price. Now you got to choose which one of them are you going to pay. You're not going to be moral in any case. It's your lose-lose situation. Now decide where you're, and there is no right answer in this scenario. It always changes, and we always look for solutions, and it's not so black and white like I made it. But what I always tell people, and those of you who have been with me and my programs in the Golan, I always say there are no right answers in this case. We do have the right questions. And if we care enough to ask these questions and have these moral discussions with our soldiers and do these drills that have moral dilemmas in them, then even if you make the wrong decision one time, and in the fog of war mistakes do happen, you still stay on the right moral path. with that said, so I'll just say that this tank here, which I hope you guys can see and you can understand, this is an illustration, this is a mouse, sometimes can be more powerful than this. Because when these videos are going around the world, there's a lot of pressure in Israel, and then Israel has to give answers. And I can tell you from personal experience that I've been in situations in Gaza in the 2014 war where, due to fake news and things that were going on social media, we had to cease fire. So this tank many times can be much stronger than this tank, because I wasn't allowed to shoot one bullet because of what this was doing. And that's where you guys come into place, and you guys are also fighters in this battlefield. And as I said, in my eyes, this is the most important battlefield, because this is what affects the BDS, and this is what affects our economy and different things. And if we want the state of Israel to thrive, we do need, if we like it or not, to work with the rest of the world. So with that said, that's in general the military challenges. I'm going to try doing something that usually takes me half an hour now in 3 minutes. So hold on tightly. It's going to be intense if it hasn't been intense so far. And I'll say very briefly, one very important geopolitical issue we need to understand, because you cannot understand any region, anything happening in Israel today without understanding that issue. So the Middle East has many conflicts in it. I'm going to ignore all of them. I'm just going to run through it. We have the conflict over regional dominance between Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, just for example. We also have the religious conflict, right? We have a lot of Muslims around us. We have Sunnis and Shiites. I'm not going to go into the differences. All you need to know for now is that they hate each other, okay? For different reasons, they hate each other. And as you see, most of the Muslims in the world are Sunni, 85% of them, and very few, only 15%, 1-5, are Shiites. Iran is Shiite, and we'll reach Iran in a second. I'm also going to really run through what we call the national state conflict. After World War I, a bunch of artificial entities were created in the Middle East by Western countries, France and Britain. And what they basically did is shove together in a national state a bunch of groups that, as I showed before, don't know how to get along with each other. If it's Sunnis and Shiites and other ethnic groups, and it's a whole mess that doesn't work. You just have an example of Iraq and Lebanon here. Again, I'm doing it very short and intense. What I want to focus on is this conflict, Iran versus Israel. And this leads us to the big question is, 1 second, why the hell is Iran against Israel? So now let's take a step back, and the issue we must understand is Iran. So Iran is Shiite, and as I mentioned briefly before, Shiites and Sunnis within Islam don't like each other. There was a big battle between them 1,400 years ago in year 680, and ever since, the Sunnis are the dominant party in the Muslim world, and the Shiites are the oppressed minority. And in 1979, there is the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and the Mullah regime takes over. This radical religious regime has a vision. They have a mission. Their mission is to take the leadership crown of the Muslim world back to Shiite hands. That's their job. I'm not going to go into the whole ideology, but basically what they believe is that that's their job. Now, they believe in what we call exporting the revolution, meaning it's not enough that now the Mullah regime, the radical Shiite Mullah regime, is controlling Iran. We need to export this revolution to the rest of the Muslim world and eventually to the rest of the world. So stage 1 is Iran, stage 2 would be the rest of the Middle East, and stage 3 will be the war. Their first successful initiative is in 1984, HEZBOLLAH, which today is the richest and strongest terrorist organization in the world. A stronger military force than many European armies, just so you understand. And now the big question is, okay, this is very nice, but how does it have to do with Israel? So Iran wants to export the revolution. How do you export a revolution? A, you need to export your army. B, you need to have proxies. You need to have different groups in different countries that support you and can help you afterwards with boots on ground, because the Iranian army is not enough for dealing with all of this. The group in charge of exporting the revolution is the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard. Within the Revolutionary Guards, which protect the Iranian regime, there's the Quds Force. Till a few months ago, they were commanded by a very nice guy named Qasem Soleimani of blessed memory. And the Quds Force is responsible to find allies around the region How do they find allies? Every place around the Middle East you'll see where you have a combination of an unstable regime plus some sort of Shiite population, very soon you'll find Iranian influence there, you'll find an Iranian proxy there. Just look at this map. The Iranian proxies are operating in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, HEZBOLLAH. We'll reach Gaza in a second. Also down here in Yemen, and of course also in Bahrain and other countries in the Gulf, they're fishing around. And when the Iranians are looking around them and they're seeking to export the revolution, they have one struggle. They are Shiites. The countries all around them, the majority of the people all around them are Sunni. And they realize they need to find some sort of common interest, or common enemy. What bothers the Muslims living around here? The fact that Israel is here controlling Jerusalem, controlling the state of Israel, the land of Israel, right? It contradicts their religious beliefs, and right, they're in for resistance. So Iran, I can say very wisely, steps in to the Israeli-Arab conflict, and we are the common enemy. We're the Iranian step in the door to the Sunni world, because if we talk about HEZBOLLAH in Lebanon, which is today, again, considered the undefeated Muslim army, right? You saw those Merkava tanks blowing up. They defeated the IDF. That's how the Muslim world views this. And that leads to a situation where Hamas in Gaza says, 1 second, who can help us against the Zionists, against the Jews? The Shiites, the Iranians. HEZBOLLAH will take their support, funding, military guiding, because what's more important than the Sunni Shiite issue right now, heck with that, is to fight Israel. So that's why we are so important for the Iranians. If you're wondering why a country 600 miles away, there's 600 miles between my house and the Golan Heights to the Iranian border, but we're so important to them for that, not for religious issues, by the way. You can check me afterwards in Google. Up to 1979, Jerusalem had no meaning to Shiite Muslims, only to Sunnis. But since it's important to Sunnis, Iran makes it important for the Shiites here so they can confront Israel on that topic. So now that we understood Iran's role, what we can do is now really go border by border. Ellie, you'll do my timing, you'll check it, okay? You'll tell me how much time I have left. You can text me. So the first border I'm going to talk about is the most important border in my eyes, and it's called the northern border. As I said, last week I was on reserve duty, operational stuff. The scenario we practiced wasn't Lebanon. Okay, we see her in the Lebanese border, and it wasn't Syria. We view in the IDF today this as one. This is the northern border. The next war is not going to be the third Lebanon War or the second Yom Kippur War. It's going to be the first war of the north. This is one. Now I'll break it down to two, but very soon you'll realize why it's one. So I'll start with Lebanon. Lebanon, first of all, is totally effed up, okay? A messed up country. Again, it's an artificial entity. You see, you have Christians, you have Sunnis, you have Shiites. In this mess, I want you to notice this Shiite population. Okay, remember Shiites, Iran, HEZBOLLAH is Shiite. HEZBOLLAH is an Iranian proxy. Look where the Shiite population is located in Lebanon. There's half of them are located on the border with Israel, southern Lebanon, and the second half is located by the border with Syria here. Okay, so what is this? I want to focus on this. What does this lead to? This is HEZBOLLAH's stronghold. Okay, their headquarters, logistics, and everything is located here, but this is really where most of their military force is located, southern Lebanon. There's over 80 Shiite villages in this region. Okay, so the Shiites are very dominant here. Now, let's say a word about HEZBOLLAH. Remember, we spoke about the hybrids. So if you can try defining HEZBOLLAH, I'm going to try making it short. So I'm not going to start asking people here because it's always Harrison and Trevor answering anyways. So I'll just say HEZBOLLAH. If I ask you guys to define HEZBOLLAH, some of you will say it's a terrorist organization, which is true. They shoot at civilians, right? So that's terror. It's also a political player, though. HEZBOLLAH is the most important political player in Lebanon today. They're part of the Lebanese government. It's also a guerrilla organization. Okay, they fight guerrilla warfare. It's also the biggest religious organization in Lebanon. It's also an organized army, as we'll see very soon. It's becoming more and more structured and organized like an army. And it's also, by the way, the largest charity organization in Lebanon. A lot of the whole welfare system in Lebanon is messed up, and HEZBOLLAH is the only one that can actually provide bread and food and something for the poor people there. So you have this hybrid octopus, which has lots of arms, and you can't just fight it in one of the arms. That's what makes it so complicated. I will focus on what my unit or we can do. So remember, you saw the map of Gaza. Remember, we spoke about the Shiites being in southern Lebanon. Every few months, the IDF spokesperson puts out an updated map of the strongholds of HEZBOLLAH in southern Lebanon. Roughly 85 villages here. Every colorful dot you see is a military outpost. And it's all in towns, in villages. Now, I showed you already the challenge before. You need to understand also, there's a big challenge for us to find the enemy, understand where is the enemy. And another thing you need to understand, this for you as guys who are fighting in the perception battlefield, something we're trying to make out clear to the world is that what you see here is a double war crime. You see here from one side that civilians are being used as human shields. That is a war crime. The rockets that are stored in babies' rooms and in mosques are aimed towards civilians. Two war crimes in one arena. Now, speaking about the rockets, 2006, HEZBOLLAH had an arsenal of about 15,000 rockets, and the most southern point they reached was a little bit past Haifa. Okay, and again, they spent that war, for those who are not familiar, lasted a little bit over a month, and 1 million Israelis were under fire in that war. Look what they hold today. Roughly 130,000 rockets that can cover the whole state of Israel. Everything. Okay, this is what they hold today. So when we talk about the next war, it's going to be dirty. We're talking about hundreds of rockets, of missiles landing all over Israel every day. This is a challenge. We have Iron Dome, we have the Arrow, we have David's Sling. Again, it's not 100%. And maybe now you can understand why we got to say honestly, there is mutual deterrence between Israel and HEZBOLLAH. Because we understand this is going to be like what we're facing with Corona now. This is going to shut down the whole Israeli economy. Or it might, in a certain scenario, which we'll talk about soon. So that's my second problem with that. With that said, I got to say one positive thing about the fact that HEZBOLLAH is growing and becoming stronger and stronger, and of course, has today. The average HEZBOLLAH fighter has more military experience today, combat experience, than IDF soldiers. I've been out of the army for 3.5 years. The captains today, the company leaders today, just drafted to the IDF in the last war. They've never seen real battle. The HEZBOLLAH fighters who are deeply involved in Syria have a lot of combat experience, and we've seen HEZBOLLAH in Syria operate in very, very large scales, such as an organized army. Why is that positive for us? People are scared of it. I think it's very positive, because when it was a very small guerrilla organization, it was very hard for our intelligence to understand how do they think, how do they operate, right? It's a disappearing enemy. Where the hell is the enemy, right? How is he thinking? How is he operating? The moment he's more structured and more organized, I can understand him better, and he's more primable. I can give better intelligence. HEZBOLLAH today, to us, we understand HEZBOLLAH today better than ever. And one of the highlights of understanding HEZBOLLAH was a year and 2 months ago when we exposed 6 tunnels they dug from Lebanon into Israel, what we called Operation Northern Shield, and we eliminated a strategic weapon they prepared for the next war, and we did it all live on Facebook and Instagram. It was all with the IDF spokesman, tunnel by tunnel. Talking about war of perception, we also know how to operate. People in Lebanon were furious. They were saying, HEZBOLLAH is endangering us. HEZBOLLAH is investing money in this instead of helping us. So that's just a word about Lebanon. That will lead us to Syria. Syria is very complex, and I'm trying to make it short because I want to leave time for questions. I'll just say Syria, if we just try numbering or naming the players active in Syria. So I'm just going to shoot quickly. Well, look, should I embarrass Trevor or not? I can't imagine someone fell asleep in my class. Um, so if I try, let's just for fun name. You know what? Let's have you guys involved. Can anyone, aside from Trevor and Harrison, name some actors in the Syrian civil war, in the Syrian arena? Right, there's a civil war happening there now. Who can name? Who can tell me who's involved there? Unmute yourself. Go.
Assad.
Okay, the Assad regime.
There's also Russian forces involved.
Okay, right. Russia. Anyone else? You guys are listening to me. You probably follow the news here and there, right?
ISIS.
Okay, ISIS.
Was Turkey?
Turkey, you're right. Okay, I'll make it a little bit faster. I'll throw in Al Qaeda and the Kurds. Okay, Iran, Israel, United States of America, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, China, France. Let's see, did I forget anyone? The rebels, right? The opposition forces, which is roughly 600 different groups, but I'll keep it at one finger. I think you got the point. So to make it very clear to you, since we have a short time and I was asked to leave time for questions. So here's a map of the interest in Syria. You'll understand who's fighting against who, what are the different coalitions. You got this, you got the whole Syrian conflict. Okay, makes life easier, I hope. So I'm not going to try explaining this whole thing because that's going to take me 3 more hours. What I want to focus on is Israel's interest here. This mess shouldn't have been affecting Israel because it's inner issues, but I'm not going to start talking about the different wars. You know, there's 6 different wars happening in what you see in front of you. One of them is an inner war between the Syrian, or the people who live in what we call Syria, the artificial entity of Syria. I want to focus on how does it affect Israel. So March 2011, last week, by the way, March 15, demonstrations began in Syria. It escalated very soon, and it became a civil war. 2 years later, February 2013, Assad doesn't control 90% of the border with Israel. Now, when this mess all begins, how this was part of a chain of demonstrations and revolts all around the Middle East. What did we call it in the Western world? We called it the Arab Spring, right? It was so romantic. In 2013, we wake up and it's not an Arab Spring anymore, it's an Islamic winter. The neighbors we have on the Golan Heights are ISIS and Al Qaeda. We have a bunch of radical jihadist groups, and we start saying to ourselves, wow, we miss Assad. I mean, right, the guy's a douche, he's evil, he's a dictator, but he kept the border quiet for 40 years. I mean, he was reliable. Now we have all these crazy jihadists, and we don't understand how they think, how do they operate, who the hell do we talk to there? And we start missing Assad. Assad comes back in July 2018. Maybe some of you even were with me watching the battles on the Syrian border as we watched Assad conquering the region again. But something very crucial happened in 2015, and that's the Russian coming in. The Russians come in for different reasons, which we can leave for questions, and that gives Iran the legitimacy to come out of the closet. From day one, here in March 2011, Iranian troops, including HEZBOLLAH, were operating in Syria, especially, by the way, by the Israeli border, trying to use the chaos to attack Israel. And they kept on denying it. The moment Russia steps in, Iran says we're in too. Iran imports tens of thousands of Shiite fighters into Syria, different militias. HEZBOLLAH at some point has 7,000 fighters on Syrian ground. And together with the Russian Air Force and the Iranian fighters, Assad has power now. His army is very weak. His army is really not a challenge for us. And that's what allows him to conquer most of Syria today. Now, these are just a few numbers from the Syrian civil war. Of course, you're not going to see it in the media, even when there's not corona, because it's just not interesting. But if you look at here, 600,000 direct casualties, just so you understand, we're talking about 9 years and a week of war. This is 10 times more than all the casualties in the Israeli-Arab conflict, which has been around for 150 years, 100 years, right? From the first early Zionist pioneers. How much do you hear about this in the media? How much do you hear about the Israeli-Arab conflict? So these are just a few numbers. And what I want to focus on is what's Israel's interest in Syria. So these are our top two interests in Syria, Iran and Iran. Our third interest would be HEZBOLLAH. Our fourth and fifth would be Iran. The sixth, you got the point. This is really, really all we care about in Syria, Iran and HEZBOLLAH. Now, we do have minor issues. ISIS, I live right here. ISIS used to control this region, but where I live, they lost it, but they still have fighters there. And the new ISIS leader just a month and a half ago declared, he said, he says to my fighters, don't give up. We have a new goal. Our new goal now is to attack the Zionists, attack Israel. And he said, I want you to attack in the Golan Heights and the Sinai Peninsula. So we do have the Syrian army, we do have ISIS, but really that is peanuts. It sounds crazy to you maybe, it's peanuts. The big story is Iran. What does Iran want in Syria? How does Israel stop it? The first thing Iran wants in Syria is to Lebanonize the Golan Heights. What we saw in Lebanon, southern Lebanon, they seek to create the same exact thing in the Golan Heights. So that's the first thing they want. And by the way, they also have Gaza, if you remember. So that would create a physical front line, a third front line between Iran and Israel. The second thing they want is what we call the missile project. You saw the map of HEZBOLLAH. You know HEZBOLLAH holds 130,000 rockets. Those are statistic weapons. You shoot, you aim, you shoot, and you pray to Allah it hits the right place. Right? It's statistic. 1 out of 100 will hit. What happens if you can make these what we call preceded guided munition, meaning every one of the missiles, or not every one, just 100 of them, will have GPS on them. And you'll be sitting in your control room, maneuvering the missile to hit. You'll have 2 missiles aimed at the main train station. 2 missiles will be aimed at the parliament. 2 missiles at the stock market building, right? You can shut down the whole state of Israel and the Israeli economy with a few missiles. This is already a strategic problem. And this is something they're trying to use the chaos in Syria to send through the chaos in Syria ground shipments, I guess you can say, from Iran via Iraq, via Syria to HEZBOLLAH and Lebanon. I must say these shipments were supposed to be Amazon, right, to go very quickly. They're ending up being AliExpress. They never reach their destination. We'll see very soon why. And then the last thing is the Shia Crescent. If you remember, I told you that Iran has a goal to take over the Middle East. And they have these proxies, right? Look at the map here. Iran, they got it, right? Check. Iraq today is an Iranian proxy. Check. Lebanon, Iranian proxy. Gaza, they have something there. And if I go down, you also have Yemen. Syria is the keystone. If they get Syria, they have the first stage of the Shiite empire from Tehran to the Mediterranean. Who's next? Saudi Arabia, Jordan. We're not next. Okay, they still need us. Remember, we're important. So now you understand the threat. That's why Syria is so important to them, and that's why till today they're still investing in Syria. What do we do to stop them? First of all, we have diplomacy. I'll just say we're working a lot with the United States of America. The sanctions are very effective in this case because Iran doesn't have, we're not talking about Corona even. Before Corona, we'll leave Corona for the end. Iran doesn't have money to pay all of these fighters, and the fighters are starting to pull out of Syria, not because they love us, not because they gave up, it's just because there's no money. And I'm talking also about the Golan Heights and also about Syria in general. They're pulling out to Iraq. So that's, for example, one diplomatic effort with the United States of America. Another interesting diplomatic effort, which we saw a few days ago with Corona, is if you look at this map, remember we said who's next? Saudi Arabia, Jordan, the Gulf countries. The Sunni countries have realized something in the last few years. They've realized that they focused on the wrong enemy all these years. The big threat is coming from the Shiite aggressor here, and it's coming at them. And they're panicking, they're shaking, and they're looking for allies that they can trust. And very soon they understood there's an ally they can trust called Israel, which has great cyber, great capabilities. And they said to themselves, 1 second, why are we not working with Israel? Because of the Palestinians? Screw the Palestinians. We're working with Israel. Now, I can go on and on telling you how close the connections are today between us and the Muslim countries around us, but you saw it just a few days ago, right? The Mossad brought 100,000 corona, what do you call it in English? Checkups? What's the word for it? You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, the test.
There you go. Right. Testing kits from some sort of some Muslim country in the Gulf, right? This would, you couldn't imagine this a few years ago. So this is effective diplomacy, and just like Iran used us as their step in the door to the Sunni world, we're using them also now as our step in the door to the Sunni world. Military. So I'll just say, I told you the shipments of game-changing weapons and these smart missiles going through Syria haven't been reaching their destination on time. I'll just say, even with Corona happening in the last few days, a couple of times, Iranian shipments and Iranian bases in Syria mysteriously blew up in the middle of the night. I say mysteriously because really I have no idea who's responsible for these attacks. You guys can take your guesses. I won't say a word. I won't deny. I won't approve. If you want to see, though, what is happening with boots on ground here in the Golan Heights, I don't know why, and if I would, I couldn't say. HEZBOLLAH is, something's happening here in the last 2 weeks, and there have been, till the Corona crisis really broke out 10 days ago, the days before, there were, within 3 days, 3 military clashes on the Golan Heights. I'm going to put here, you see here a QR code. You can scan it with your phone. You'll see on my Instagram a video, which a local Druze took a video of an Israeli helicopter firing a missile into Syria, striking a HEZBOLLAH team that was working on shooting into Israel. And the moment that's there on social media, I guess I can't blame the Swiss Army. So you can just take a guess that that would be us. So we have diplomacy, we have military. One last thing we have is baby diapers. And we can talk about that at a different time. Maybe some of you are familiar with it. One of the things we did to stop Iran was what we called Operation Good Neighbor, in which we, for 5 years, remember, we have 5 years where there's no Syrian regime controlling the border between Israel and Syria, this gap of 5 years. What we did is, in the IDF, we established a unit called the Good Neighbor Unit, which provided the local people with humanitarian aid. From baby diapers to food to medicine to taking the Syrian people into Israeli hospitals. And we did it, first of all, because it was the right moral thing to do. But we also did it because it served our strategic interest. Because when you saw the maps of Gaza and Lebanon, and you saw the people being used as human shields, right? The guerrilla warfare happening in the cities, you need to understand that this all relies on local support. If the locals in southern Lebanon won't support HEZBOLLAH, HEZBOLLAH will lose the war the next day. If the locals in Gaza don't support Hamas, they'll lose. So what we did is basically we used the fact that there was no government, there was no barrier between us and the people, and we connected to the people, and we created some very close friendships there. And when Iran comes in, the Iranian militias come in, you know, they're Shiites. The locals living by the border with Israel are Sunni. And what do you do in this case? You take out from your pocket the common enemy card. One little problem, we're not the enemy anymore. We're the good neighbor. The head recruiter for the Iranian militias in the Syrian Golan Heights was assassinated 2.5 months ago. Nothing to do with Israel. The locals killed him. And if not Corona, the big news would have been, we've been seeing it here from the Golan, we see smoke on the other side. The locals in the last 3 weeks are out in the streets. They're blocking crucial junctions. They're kidnapping and killing Assad officials because they're saying to him, you know, you came here 1.5 years ago and nothing has changed. You're not investing anything in improving our lives. And the only thing we have here is Iranians trying to confront Israel, which we don't want to. We want stability in the region. Of course, they can't say they owe us and they love us. So these guys are now, without us being involved, are already doing it. They're doing the job for us and keeping the Iranians preoccupied with these riots and everything instead of fighting us. So with that said, what I want to just very, very briefly say is the Iran effect and then your questions. So Gaza. Gaza for Iran, I'm going to quit the PowerPoint a little bit. Gaza for Iran is some sort of lab, okay? It's really a masterpiece of the perception work. And it's really providing Iran with an ability to check different things on Israel and then do it 10 times better in Lebanon, talking about the tunnels, talking about the rockets. That's what they're seeking. So that's what first thing you need to understand about Gaza. And for Israel, Gaza is sort of a pain in the butt. Now, look at this for a second. I'm going to share my screen again. Here's a map of Gaza. I'm not giving you any confidential secret. Okay, I'm just going to tell you that both sides know this, Israel and Hamas. How long do you guys think it will take Israel to conquer Gaza? So the landscape doesn't change. There's 3 main corridors in Gaza, and last time the IDF did it was in 2009. It took us 6 hours to reach the sea. Let's say it will take us 10 to 12 hours this time. We can cut down Gaza within 12 hours, and within 24 hours, we conquered Gaza. Why aren't we doing it? So you need to understand what are the options we have? What are the solutions we have to offer to Gaza? We can conquer it, we can occupy it, and stay. Do we want to control almost 2 million Palestinians there? Just think about if we were now in control of Gaza, okay, if, let's say 3 months ago there was an escalation, we took over Gaza, and now we have Corona. Do we want to deal with the mess that's happening there? No. So that's not an option. My second option, I can go into Gaza, I can destroy Hamas, I'll bring Hamas down, and then I'll leave. Who's going to come instead? ISIS, Islamic Jihad, some Iranian support groups. It's going to be chaos, which I can't ignore. Gaza and Israel, if we like it or not, are tied together. So that's also not an option. Another option I have, I can do what I did in the last war. I can go in, destroy some facilities, give Hamas an insurance policy, and I'll say, I'm not bringing you guys down, and let's find some sort of agreement at the end. Did it work? No, we're still under fire. So that option doesn't work, and that leaves us one last option, somehow reach some sort of long-term ceasefire with Hamas. And that's why, if you're wondering why Israel's not going in, even though we can beat them within 6 hours, it's because if we're going to go to this, we're not going to do these two. If we're going to do this, nothing's going to change at the end unless we do this. So why have dozens of people killed, dozens of soldiers and people under fire, and the whole economy in southern Israel ruined if I can just reach it like this? That's why the Israeli policy is to try reaching a long-term ceasefire with Hamas, if you like it or not, but maybe I hope I explained to you why we're not going in. By the way, this QR code is a nice thing I found on a social media yesterday. You can see what happens when Hamas takes cement, and instead of building terror tunnels, they're building, because of the corona, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Quarantine, how do you pronounce it? Quarantine. Quarantine, thank you very much. You guys are giving me English class for free. Quarantine buildings, I wish in Israel they can build so fast. It's like mass building, it's crazy. When they want to invest in their own people, they know how to do it very well. They just don't want to do it. What's the big problem with Gaza? I'll just say one thing about the ground forces. Up to the corona crisis, now things have cut down for 2 years now. There's demonstrations every Friday where people come to the border. You have what we call night run teams, people who run around the border, lighting fires, nothing you can shoot them for, but you can understand it's unbearable to live there with the smoke and everything. And balloons, all these new, techie weapons such as balloons, etc. And what's happening is that if you're a soldier now at the border, you won't shoot a little kid with balloons, and you also won't shoot the old lady there. And when finally there is a terrorist, it needs to be very, very exact. So the tank won't be shooting. What we'll be shooting is probably a drone or something. And this really is frustrating the young guys there. They're saying, I'm not going home for a month. I don't see my girlfriend. I'm here fighting, and the IDF is not using me. It's all intelligence and Air Force and drones. And this is a big challenge, talking about motivational challenges. The Gaza region is very complex for us, talking about motivational stuff. And honestly, I got to say, I don't agree with the IDF. I think the ground forces must be used. If not, they'll degenerate. Last thing I'll say in questions, this is the last picture, and I left it for last for a reason, the Palestinians. You see the deal of the century here? The reason why I left the Palestinians for the end is because, if you like it or not, they're just not relevant. It's not relevant. Life is relatively good in Judea and Samaria. It's probably the best place, aside from Israel and the United States of America, to be a Muslim living there. So they have no reason to endanger all this and come out to the streets against the deal of this century. But talking about what we spoke about, the Iranian threat, maybe that will explain to you how an American president is standing, showing a map explaining how Israel will annex parts of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria. The Israeli prime minister, which is from a right-wing party, is standing by him, being complimented. He's talking about Israel's rights over Jerusalem and the land. And 3 Muslim ambassadors are sitting in the crowd, clapping and giving him a standing ovation. And aside from Turkey and Iran, surprise, surprise, no Muslim or Arab country has come out against this plan. And this is because the countries just realized the Palestinians just screwed up. As I think Henry Kissinger said, they never miss a chance to miss a chance. Maybe it was Dennis Ross. Why should we prevent ourselves from working with Israel and the United States? Because of the Palestinians. Screw them. So I left them for last because really, really, not talking about Corona, because now you see how important it is that we work with them, but it's just not relevant. The big story is not Israel and the Palestinian conflict. The big story is the Iranian aggressor. With that said, guys, it's been long. Your questions, if anyone's still up.
I have a question regarding HEZBOLLAH. So,
Who am I talking to?
Raphael.
Raphael. Okay, I don't see.
Yeah.
Where are you from, Raphael? I don't see him.
I'm from Florida right now.
Okay.
I'm in Florida. I'll put my camera on. So I was wondering. So you talked a lot about HEZBOLLAH, and of what you said, like the Israeli army seems well informed of what of their capabilities and everything. I was wondering, why didn't the Israeli army act earlier against HEZBOLLAH and maybe wipe them out earlier?
Well, in 2006, we confronted HEZBOLLAH. And talking about a war of perception, if you ask HEZBOLLAH, they won. But Hassan Nasrallah, the head of HEZBOLLAH, said, if I would know Israel would react that way, I would have never gone into that. I wouldn't kidnap the 2 Israeli soldiers which started the war, meaning there is deterrence. They have a lot to lose. They're scared of us. On the other hand, talking about the tactical level, going into the 2006 war, the IDF didn't train for years. Different mistakes were made, and so there were a lot of casualties. And people in Israel, when the war ended, felt we lost. When we look at it 13 years later, the Lebanon border has been quiet for 13 years. Gaza, we went to war, we smashed Hamas within a few weeks, and just it took them 2-3 years and they went back to regular. So there is deterrence, but as I said, the deterrence is mutual. So you don't want to go, we also paid a very heavy price for fighting HEZBOLLAH. So we don't just want to go to war with them. We did confront them in Syria a couple of times, and we did eliminate one of their most strategic and secret weapons, the tunnels. Why didn't we attack the tunnels before? Because we wanted them to be complete, and we wanted to understand them and understand exactly where they're going. These tunnels were top secret. Very, very few people in Lebanon and HEZBOLLAH knew about it. And they still are shocked and trying to find out, how the heck did we find out about this?
All right.
Okay, so I hope there is deterrence. We have to say honestly, if we go to war against them, we'll probably win, but we're going to pay a very, very heavy price. And we don't just want to go into war. We tried pushing off the war as much as we can. It's going to happen eventually. We won't be able to live with their threats.
I got you. All right, thanks a lot.
So I have a question. So what do you think the Middle East will look like in 50 years from now, with Iran and all the different players in the region?
Try asking me what will the Middle East look like 50 days from now, and I won't know how to answer that. First of all, I was going to say that in my conclusion. It's still early to estimate, but Corona has a very major effect there. I'll say a word about it at the end. Meaning Corona is changing the Middle East as we talk, and in some ways, some things that military and diplomacy didn't do, Corona might be doing. That's why also we have a lot of conspiracies, by the way, conspiracy theories. I'll leave that for my conclusion. I think 2020, even before Corona, was some sort of a watershed line where we will see different things happening. Israel, I told you the 4th option is what Israel wants. In Gaza, for example, of reaching a deal. If we can't reach a deal this year, we're going to have to go to war there. We can't live with 1 million residents under fire whenever Hamas is pissed at us. We'll have to go in eventually, unless we reach a deal. It's going to happen in 2020, if you ask me. Iran, is even before Corona, their economy was about to collapse because of the sanctions. Demonstrations all around the region against them in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Iran, all these countries where they're involved, the people are coming out against the government saying, why are you not taking care of us, the people? And very soon they're saying, oh, it's because of Iran. So the demonstrations are against Iran. And again, forget Corona. So Iran will have to decide, are they taking the money and investing it in their own people or continuing to export the revolution? And that means we'll see the region still unstabilized. Let's try going a year from now. I'll try giving some hope, and I'll say I believe we'll see the Iranians reducing their activity for now, because they're the regime there is very weak. And that means we have a great opportunity to continue strengthening our connections with the Muslim countries. I think through social media, the communities there and here are coming closer and closer. There's no government in between now because they can, right? You can talk to a Saudi blogger or a YouTuber now as much as you want. And I have some crazy Saudi guys I follow on Facebook, and they record songs in Hebrew and talk to Israelis every Shabbat and say Advar Torah, which is nuts. So I think I'm optimistic after everything. We just have to overcome this COVID-19. One last question, Ellie, and then conclusion. Is there
I
anyone?
got a question.
Yes. Which one of you?
Both of us, we had the same question.
Okay, go for it.
So how big of a threat do you say the joint list in the Knesset is security-wise?
How big is the joint list? What do you,
how big of a security threat is it?
I don't view them as a security threat, really not. I think they're a threat to the Arab society in Israel, to the Muslim Israeli. You're getting me into politics here. I came to talk security. But still, I'll say, when I meet Israeli Arabs, and I meet a lot of Israeli Arabs, you see they're interested in integrating into the Israeli society. And you see it in the Israeli elections. They feel they're coming out to vote now. They want to be involved. They want to take care of crime rates there, which are horrible. They want to take care of illegal weapons. They want to take care of a lot of things. The biggest tragedy is that the representatives support terror. So it's not legitimate to cooperate with them, as simple as it is. And I'm waiting for the day. I think it's because people are scared. I can't imagine an Arab list, an Arab party coming saying, we are now the Israeli-Arab integration or friendship party. If they do it, a lot of people will vote for them, I believe, but they're not going to do it because their house is going to burn the next day, probably. Okay, so I think it's mainly a threat to the integration of Arab society. The moment their politicians will actually represent the people and take care of the people, things will be much better here.
Awesome.
Okay, I'm going to conclude because I'm already over time. I apologize. I said 2020 is a watershed line. First of all, the Soleimani effect. The most important player in the region, in the Middle East, is not in the region anymore. And I got to say, I was shocked. You know, when Soleimani was killed, first of all, I was shocked that the US actually knocked this guy out. What shocked me even more is that I went on American media and I was expecting to see people out in Times Square screaming, USA, USA, like when bin Laden was assassinated. And instead, I saw people saying, oh no, we're going to war. Oh no, why didn't Congress know about this? And God knows what. Guys, this is the most important event. Again, ignore Corona. I'm trying to leave Corona out of the picture because it's still too early to understand its effect. The number one terrorist in the world, which unlike bin Laden and al-Baghdadi from ISIS, was assassinated when he was at his high power, is gone. This guy is the mastermind behind the whole Iranian plan. Everything we discussed today, it's all in his brain. This guy is the most brilliant, charismatic leader Iran had, and he's out of the game. Why is it so important? Because now that he's out of the game, he felt invincible. He didn't, you know, he said, no one's gonna mess with me. He didn't bother raising the next generation of leaders. Now look what's happening now to the Iranian Revolution forces. They have demonstrations inside Iran. The people are putting pressure saying, put the money into us, help us, right? The medical system with COVID everything's collapsing. And the reason why the money wasn't going for the people was because of this guy. He was so charismatic. He was so powerful. He was sitting by Khamenei, the leadership, the #1 guy in Iran, right, the religious leader. And he was saying to him, no, the money will keep on going to Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, and Yemen. This guy's out of the picture. And with this thing in the picture, right, I don't know if you guys know, Iran might even be the country with most casualties in the whole world. The official numbers are not right. Okay, the official numbers are talking about 2,000 casualties, I think. It's fake. We're talking about close to 6,000 probably. That's probably the true numbers. They're just hiding it. Okay, but on social media, you see mass graves. A lot of Iranians are dying. The whole country is under crisis. And there's no money here because the money is in Syria, Lebanon, etc. And with this guy out of the picture and this happening, it gives me a lot of hope that the money is going to start being invested in the Iranian people instead of fighting us. So that's the main thing. And again, as I said, it's a watershed line. We're gonna see, is the deal of the century going to move forward or not? Is Gaza going to have a deal or another world? And is Syria going to focus on rebuilding itself, or is it going to become Second Lebanon? Since I gave you a lot of fire, ashes, and fury, I want to end just with one little thing, which some of you might have seen before. I want to end with one thing that gives me hope, and that is this picture. This is a picture some of you might know. It's a drawing of an Israeli flag, and it was drawn by a 9-year-old Syrian girl who was treated in Israel during Operation Good Neighbor. It says in Arabic, you can Google Lens it afterwards. It says in Arabic, to the son of Jacob, okay, Jacob, our forefather, I love you, thank you. And this is what happens when people meet people. This is what happens when there is no terrorist organization or regime in between inciting the people against the other side, telling them they're devils with horns and tails. And on the other side of where I live, there are today tens of thousands of people that were exposed to the real face of Israel. And when they went back into Syria after being treated in Israel or receiving goods on the Israeli border, this is the perception they have in us today. And one day, you know, we didn't just do the right moral thing, and we didn't just do something that served our strategic interest. This is also something that plants seeds for a better future. You asked, Dylan asked about 50 years from now, the Middle East. This girl will be 60 years old. She's going to have grandchildren, and her children and grandchildren will grow up knowing that they're good people on the other side, not enemies. Guys, it was a pleasure. I hope it wasn't too long. I'm glad thank you for those who stayed.
Thank you so much. It was amazing.
And
yeah, thank you.
good to see you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
guys.
Yaakov, for this awesome presentation. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We have another awesome Zoom call on Thursday with a settler. He wants you to challenge him and invite all your friends. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be really fun. And, have a great day. Have a good night. Have a good morning wherever you are.
We hope to see you soon out of lockdown.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Yaakov.
Yalla, bye.
How do we get out?